Now, the 2026 school year has begun, but for thousands of parents and children, the first week has been marred by frustration, disruption, and a crisis caused by delayed placements. Scenes of overcrowding and devastation are playing out across the country as children are yet to be allocated schools. Joining us now to discuss this crisis and what can be done is Dr. Jaco Deacon, the CEO of FEDSAS. Doc, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this morning. So thousands of children across the country remain unplaced in schools, especially on the first day of this new academic year. What does this widespread placement failure reveal about the state of our education system as well as government's planning capacity?
Let's start with the matric results. The matric results gave us a false sense of security that everything is okay in the system, and it's not okay. The learners performed despite of the system, like we've seen this week, where thousands of learners are still waiting to get spaces and places. Now, I think the problem is threefold. Number one is that we do have a lack of capacity in some provinces, specifically in Gauteng and Western Cape, where we've got an influx of people. So we simply don't have the sufficient number of schools. The second one is where parents simply wait for the last minute and then show up at schools. Some of the provinces, those children are already in a school, and now the parents want to move the child to a better school. So I can find no fault with parents looking out for the best interest for their children, but the last minute creates chaos. And number three, in some of our provinces, if you look at the number of learners and you look at the number of schools, there's actually sufficient schools. But those schools are situated in areas where there's no employment opportunity. So we do see parents flock to urban areas and to our cities, and where you do have spaces in rural schools, and then there's an influx in cities. And so between those three, it creates the crisis. But I think the biggest one is where it's foreseeable that we don't have enough schools, there's an influx of learners, and my heart goes out to those children, specifically in Gauteng, where there's 1,000 still waiting to get spaces in schools.
And touching on the Gauteng province, when you speak about the lack of capacity, the Premier said it was not an issue of capacity, but rather an issue of choice, where parents are choosing to take their children to some schools and not wanting the placement where they are being placed. And the MEC coming in and saying that it's a spatial and town planning situation where many of the municipalities are building houses and are not making reference or space for schools for children to be able to attend that would be coming from those housing units. So where exactly can we pinpoint some of the issues being? Could we say that an issue of choice by parents not wanting certain schools is really at the helm of why children are not placed?
It's definitely a factor, but it's not the main factor. I think Mr. Chiloane is missing the point. There's definitely not enough schools in his province, and he's shying away from the fact that he's not taking responsibility for the building of schools in a province. I mean, it's been long coming. So it's a failure by him as the political head to oversee the building of schools. So he failed the learners. And it was acknowledged by his spokesperson as well. It's a capacity problem. 30% of the learners in Gauteng are actually independent schools because we don't have sufficient number of public schools in the province. And that's a political issue. And not only Mr. Chiloane, it's all the MECs that came before him, starting with Mary Metcalf, all the way to Andy Motshega, Barbara Creasy, Ignatius Jacobs, the Premier, Mr. Lessufi. They didn't build sufficient schools, but by then we could see the influx of people in Gauteng. And it's a lame excuse to say we do urban development. But if you do spatial planning and you approve that on cabinet level or on premier's level, then obviously you must take commercial space into consideration. And in terms of the legislation, you must make provision for schools. Mr. Chiloane is sitting in a structure where they make those decisions to allow for development. Then he should start to say something.
You touched on the issue of influx, and we saw that in the KZN province, particularly in Durban, there was that clash off in Addington between parents of children, South African children and children of foreign nationals. And the parents of the South African children are calling for the prioritization of their children for spaces in schools. Whether or not they applied first or last, they're saying as a system, South African children should first be granted space, and then only afterwards, once space has been allocated, can children of foreign nationals then fill up the remaining spaces? Do you think that this is an unrealistic expectation of South African parents?
I don't think it's unrealistic because as citizens of the country, we do have a certain expectation that government will look after our interest on the one side. And it's not limited to KZN. We've seen Operation Dudula dealing with schools in Gauteng and on health services all countrywide. But the problem is, or the challenge for the education sector is that we don't make those kind of decisions. The High Court already ruled that the Education Department must accommodate all the learners in the country. So they didn't distinguish between citizens or even illegal people in the country. So for that decision to be overruled or that discussion should take place on cabinet level. It will mean that as a country we have to sit down and discuss our constitution. So it's not really a discussion for the education system, but I can understand that parents and citizens feel, I'm a citizen, I pay taxes, my children should get spaces, but that's a political discussion.
Then what are the long-term consequences for children who are now unable to start school or are placed in overcrowded, under-resourced classrooms? How does this impact their future prospects?
Now, well, we send a message to them that they're not important to us. As a country, that's the message we send to our children. That's the message we send to a child in an overcrowded school as well, to say, your life doesn't count. We're not serious about your education. And surely that's not what our Constitution says. If you look at our Constitution, the preamble, the dream of our country says we want to unlock the potential of every child or every person. And that's supposed to happen in the education sector. So number one is the message. But number two, if you look at a Constitution, Section 28 says, doesn't matter what the decision is, it must be in the best interest of the child. That's a constitutional obligation upon the state. So we're failing on a constitutional level as well. And thirdly, those children are behind from day one, not only on an academic level, but also on a social level, emotional level. I mean, the little ones, they've been counting the sleeps and the nights before you can go to school, and suddenly you're disappointed. You've been looking forward. I mean, you got your school clothes and everything ready, but you don't have a school. So we're absolutely sending the wrong message to those children, and it's difficult to catch up on a social level in a new school environment. So it's not conducive for good education.
It certainly isn't. We also saw regions such as Nkomazi in Mpumalanga where children have been asked not to attend to schools this coming week. I mean, the flooding in some of these regions and infrastructural backlogs have now compounded the placement crisis. How much of this crisis is due to poor planning versus unforeseen environmental challenges?
Yeah, look what's happening currently in the north of KZN and at Vembe district and Mopani district in Limpopo. I mean, that's force of nature. So schools cannot really plan for that, and there will be a proper catch-up program. And I think schools and communities will understand if you're in a flooded area, you'll realize, I'm not going to school at all. So I'm less concerned about those areas. There will be structural issues, but there will be catch-up programs that will be followed. It will not be the first time or the last time that a natural disaster will disrupt education. It's still a disruption, but I think there we will be able to make plans because there's a school, there's a structure, there's a community, and they will come together. They will use the holidays when others will have holiday as part of the catch-up process. So I'm less concerned about those children than those in areas where schooling is actually taking place and you don't have a space.
So, Dr. Deacon, I mean, the unplaced learners crisis certainly highlights deep systemic failures, like you've mentioned. What structural reforms do you think are necessary to create a sustainable and inclusive, as well as a resilient education system?
I think the different spheres of government need to talk to one another. And it's a pity that Statistics South Africa in the last census didn't give us the full picture and the extent of our population, because that's important data for your leaders and your planners to take into consideration when we develop new neighborhoods and we build new informal settlements to say we need to make space for schools. Number one, create the space. But number two, the budget must follow as well. And when you've budgeted, then there must be proper structures in place to make sure when we start to build that we will deliver a school. I read a report about a school that took 10 years to build in Gauteng. whilst the Premier of the West, or the MEC for Education, as they call them, the Minister of Education in the Western Cape, boasted about a school in Kuils River, which they started to build towards the end of September last year, and the school opened this year. So it's possible, if there's good leadership, the budget is there to deliver those material on time and to deliver a full school. So I think we need to look back at 2008 and 2009 before the Soccer World Cup, where we as a country showed the rest of the world it's possible to embark on huge infrastructure development. But then we must commit to it, stick to our timelines to say education is so important, like the World Cup then. We can build stadiums and airports and infrastructure. Surely we have the ability to build schools and then provide quality oversight. And that's what we need to do, is to use the data, use the lessons, and then to build. And number two is to make sure that we build those schools in the hotspot areas. We know where they are. And make sure that communities see the development. No child should get into one taxi or public transport, switch over to another vehicle to get to a school. Your nearest school should be your best school, and we should work towards that.
All right, Dr. Deacon, placing the progress on political will. Thank you so much for your time and joining us this morning.